August 1944, the Falaise Pocket, France. A lone P-51D Mustang rolls inverted at 8,000 feet. The pilot chops the throttle, drops the nose, and pulls the stick back into his gut. The aircraft slices through the air in a violent splittess, screaming toward the earth at 450 miles per hour. To the German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground, it looks like a crash. To the veteran pilots watching from above, it looks like suicide. The Mustang is diving into the dead man's zone, that terrified layer of air between 50 feet and the treetops where flak is thickest and reaction time is zero. The pilot pulls out at the last possible second. His propeller clears the oak trees by inches. He levels off, his belly skimming the wheat fields, his airspeed touching 400 mph. He isn't crashing, he is hunting. The German convoy on the road ahead never sees him until his 6.50 caliber machine guns light up. The lead truck explodes. The Mustang flies through the fireball, emerging on the other side covered in soot, only to bank hard and line up the next target. This is not dogfighting. This is something uglier, grittier, and infinitely more dangerous. This is rhubarb, the RAF term for low-level strafing. And the man in the cockpit, 22-year-old Lieutenant James Jimmy, last name, is flying a mission that his commanding officer explicitly told him was impossible. In the summer of 1944, the air war in Europe had changed. The Luftwaffe was broken, hiding on the ground. The new target was the Wehrmacht's supply lines, the trucks, trains, and barges moving fuel and ammo to the front. But hitting a truck from an airplane is a physics problem that kills more pilots than enemy aces do. Standard doctrine for strafing is rigid. Dive at a shallow 30-degree angle, open fire at 1,000 yards, pull up at 500 feet, avoid the debris, avoid the ground fire, live to fight another day. But Jimmy doesn't believe in shallow angles. He believes in the vertical slash. Born in Texas, Jimmy grew up racing hot rods on dirt roads. He understands speed not as a number on a gauge, but as a physical sensation. He knows that a moving target on a winding road is almost impossible to hit from a shallow angle because of slant range errors. The bullets drop too much. The target moves laterally. Jimmy's theory is radical: dive steep, dive fast, wait until you can see the driver's face. Fire at point-blank range, and then, and this is the part that makes the veterans wince, don't pull up. Stay on the deck. His squadron mates call it the suicide dive. They tell him that diving at 70 degrees from 8,000 feet leaves no margin for error. They tell him that if his engine coughs, he's dead. They tell him that target fixation will bury him in a French field. But Jimmy has done the math. He knows that German flak guns, the terrifying 20 and 37 cannons, are designed to track planes at medium altitude. They have a traverse speed limit. If you fly fast enough and low enough, you are moving faster than the gunner can crank his turret. You are effectively invisible until you have already passed. At the briefing on August 14th, the intelligence officer marks a road near Argenton on the map. German column reported here. Heavy flak, fuel trucks, ammo carriers. It's a priority target, but we advise bombing from 5,000 feet. The older pilots nod. Bombing is safe. Bombing keeps you out of the weeds. Jimmy raises his hand. Sir, if we bomb from 5,000, we'll miss. The road is under tree cover. We need to go down there. The room goes quiet. The squadron commander, a major with tired eyes, looks at the kid. Lieutenant, going down there is a one-way ticket. The flak towers are set up for exactly that. Not if we come straight down, sir, Jimmy says. We drop in vertical. We hit them before they know we're there. Then we run on the deck. The major sighs. He has seen too many young pilots with big ideas end up as telegrams to their mothers. Permission denied. Stick to the flight plan. Bomb from 5,000. That's an order. Jimmy sits back down. He doesn't argue, but in his head he is already flying the dive. He is visualizing the angle, the speed, the pullout. He knows the major is wrong. He knows that high-altitude bombing against moving trucks is a waste of gasoline. The next morning, the squadron launches. The sky is a brilliant, piercing blue. They cross the channel at 15,000 feet, the English coast fading behind them. The radio chatter is disciplined. Flight, this is lead. Target area in 5 mics. Switch to bomb run formation. Jimmy is flying tail end Charlie. He checks his gauges. The Packard Merlin engine is purring. He looks down. The French countryside is a patchwork quilt of green and brown, and there, winding through a forest like a gray snake, is the road. He sees the dust, a long line of dust. That means heavy vehicles. Lead, I see dust, Jimmy calls. Target is moving fast. Copy, the major replies. Commencing run, bombs away in 3, 2, 1. The flight releases their 500-pound bombs. The explosives whistle down. Explosions flower in the forest, big, dirty clouds of brown smoke. But Jimmy watches closely. The bombs land in the fields. They hit the trees. They miss the road. The dust cloud continues to move. The German convoy is untouched. Lead, negative effect, Jimmy radios. They missed. Request permission to make a strafing pass. -2, the major barks. Flak is heavy. We are RTB. Jimmy looks at the fuel gauge. He has plenty. He looks at the ammo counters. Full. He looks at the convoy, driving brazenly in broad daylight, carrying the shells that will kill American infantrymen tomorrow. He thinks about the manual, obey orders. He thinks about the math, speed equals survival. Lead, Jimmy says, his voice flat. I have engine trouble, dropping down to check manifold pressure. 2, confirm engine trouble. Affirmative, losing power. It is a lie, a bold court-martial-worthy lie. Jimmy peels away from the formation. He doesn't drop down gradually. He climbs. He pulls the Mustang up to 12,000 feet, positioning himself directly over the road. He waits until the sun is directly behind him. He is alone now. The rest of the squadron is turning for home. The German gunners down below are watching the departing bombers, thinking the danger has passed. They are climbing out of their trucks, lighting cigarettes, laughing at the bad aim of the Americans. Jimmy pushes the stick forward. The Mustang noses over. The horizon flips. The green earth fills the windscreen. Gravity takes hold. 300 mph, 350, 400. The engine screams as the prop tips go supersonic. The airframe shudders. The altimeter unwinds like a clock in hell. 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000. He lines up the road in his K-14 gun sight. The trucks are growing larger. He can see the canvas covers. He can see the swastikas painted on the doors. At 2,000 feet, he sees the flak tracers start to rise, but they are behind him. The gunners are firing at where he was, not where he is. He is falling faster than they can track. 1,000 feet. He tightens his grip on the stick. This is the moment, the suicide dive. If he pulls out too early, he misses. If he pulls out too late, he becomes a crater. He waits, he trusts the math. 800 feet, 700 feet, 600 feet. At 450 miles per hour, the ground isn't a landscape, it's a wall. Jimmy didn't pull back gently. You can't be gentle when you're falling out of the sky faster than a terminal velocity bomb. He hauled the stick back into his stomach with both hands, bracing his boots against the rudder pedals to keep from passing out. The P-51 Mustang is a thoroughbred, but even thoroughbreds have limits. As the elevators bit into the slipstream, the G-forces slammed Jimmy into his seat. 6 Gs. His body weight went from 170 pounds to over 1,000 pounds instantly. The blood drained from his head, pooling in his legs. His vision grayed out, the color leaching from the world until he was looking through a tunnel of monochrome static. He forced air out of his lungs in short, sharp grunts. the M1 maneuver, tensing his abdominal muscles to force blood back to his brain. Don't mush, don't mush. Mushing is the pilot's term for inertia. Even though the nose of the plane is pointing up, the momentum carries the aircraft down. If he mushed too much, he would belly flop into the French asphalt. The Mustang screamed at the bottom of the arc. The propeller tips were 10 feet off the pavement. The wash from his wake blew the leaves off the oak trees lining the road. He didn't hit. He leveled out. He was flying at 400 mph, exactly 15 feet above the ground. He was lower than the telephone poles. Ahead of him, the road stretched out like a bowling alley, and the German convoy was the pins. There were trucks everywhere. Opel Blitz transport trucks, fuel tankers, half-tracks. They were bumper to bumper, a serpentine line of logistics sitting exposed in the afternoon sun. The German drivers froze. They hadn't heard him coming. The roar of his engine had been masked by the terrain and his own speed. To them, he simply materialized out of the air, a silver demon screaming down the avenue. Jimmy flipped the gun safety switch to all. He didn't look through the standard iron sight. He looked through the K-14 gyro gun sight. It was a marvel of technology, a computing sight that calculated the lead angle. But at this range, Jimmy didn't need a computer. He needed a garden hose. He pressed the trigger. The sound of 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns firing at once is not a rat-a-tat-tat. It is a continuous, tearing roar, like canvas being ripped by a giant. The P-51 carried roughly 1,800 rounds of ammunition. The guns fired at a combined rate of 75 rounds per second. Jimmy aimed for the lead truck first. This was tactical, not random. If you kill the lead vehicle, the convoy stops. You trap the rest. The tracers converged on the engine block of the lead Opel. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the steel radiator, shredded the engine block, and ignited the fuel lines. The truck vaulted into the air, flipping end over end, blocking the road in a ball of greasy orange flame. Jimmy didn't blink. He kicked the rudder pedal slightly left. The stream of bullets walked down the line. Truck number 2, a troop transport, the canvas cover shredded. Truck number 3, an ammo carrier. Boom! The third truck vanished. The explosion was so violent it sent a shockwave rippling through the air that Jimmy felt in the cockpit. He flew right through the debris cloud. Soot coated his windscreen. A piece of burning rubber bounced off his wing. He didn't pull up. Standard doctrine said, make a pass, pull up, circle around. Jimmy knew that was suicide. If he pulled up now, he would present his belly to every flak gun in the valley. He would bleed his speed. He would become a target. No, safety was on the deck. Safety was speed. He kept the throttle pinned. He stayed in the canyon of the road below the tree line. He was flying so low that he could see the faces of the German soldiers diving into the ditches. He could see the terror in their eyes. He held the trigger down. This wasn't a precision burst. This was a suppression run. Truck 4, Truck 5, Truck 6. They were popping like firecrackers. The fuel tankers were the spectacular ones, blooming into massive mushrooms of fire that Jimmy had to bank to avoid. The German flak towers, the deadly quad 20 cannons mounted on half-tracks, began to swivel. The gunners were screaming orders, trying to crank their turrets. But Jimmy was moving at 580 feet per second. By the time the German gunner saw the Mustang, aimed and fired, Jimmy was already 600 feet down the road. The flak shells exploded harmlessly in the air behind him. He was outrunning the reaction time of the human nervous system. He wiped out the tail of the convoy, 11 trucks, burning, twisted, destroyed. He reached the end of the column and banked hard left, staying low, using a hedgerow as a screen. He checked his mirror. A pillar of black smoke, miles high, marked the spot where the Wehrmacht's supplies used to be. He checked his engine gauges, all green. He checked his ammo. The counters were low, but he had enough for defense. Target neutralized, he whispered to himself. Now came the hard part, going home. The flight back across the channel was lonely. Jimmy flew at 500 feet, nursing his fuel. The adrenaline crash hit him halfway home. His hands started shaking. The magnitude of what he had done, the sheer recklessness of the dive, started to sink in. He had disobeyed a direct order. He had lied about engine trouble. He had hazarded a $50,000 aircraft. If he hadn't hit anything, he was looking at a court-martial. He crossed the English coast. He saw the familiar grass strips of his base. He dropped his gear. Thump thump. He landed. The Mustang taxied to the revetment. As he shut down the engine, he saw the major waiting by the wing. The major wasn't alone. He had the crew chief and the intelligence officer with him. Jimmy slid the canopy back. He pulled off his helmet and climbed out. "Lieutenant," the major said, his voice was ice cold. "You reported engine trouble, yet you are 2 hours late. Did you get lost? Or did you decide to take a scenic tour of France on Uncle Sam's dime?" The crew chief, Sergeant Kowalski, walked around the front of the plane. He whistled. "Major," Kowalski said, "you better look at this." The major walked to the nose of the Mustang. The silver paint was gone. The nose was black, coated in thick, oily soot, but that wasn't the damning part. Stuck in the air intake, wedged tight against the radiator screen, was a branch, a pine branch, about 3 feet long. You don't get pine branches in your intake at 12,000 feet. The major pulled the branch out. He looked at Jimmy. He looked at the soot. "You were on the deck," the major said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir," Jimmy said. He stood at attention. "I fixed the engine trouble, sir. Thought I'd verify the target area while I was down there." "Verify?" The major threw the branch on the ground. "You went strafing alone, after I specifically ordered you not to." "The bombing run missed, sir. The target was still active." "That is not your call to make, Lieutenant. You risked this aircraft, you risked your life. And for what? A couple of stray trucks." The intelligence officer stepped forward. "Sir, we should develop the gun camera film before we proceed with disciplinary action." The gun camera, the lie detector. Every time Jimmy pulled the trigger, a small movie camera in the wing recorded exactly what the guns were seeing. It couldn't lie. It couldn't exaggerate. "Fine," the major snapped. "Develop it, and Lieutenant, go to your quarters. You're grounded until I see that film." 2 hours later, the briefing room was packed. The word had spread that the suicide kid was in trouble. The other pilots crowded in. The major sat in the front row, arms crossed. "Roll it," the major ordered. The film started. At first, it was just a blur of green and gray. The dive. The speed was evident even on film. The horizon flipped and rushed up so fast that some of the pilots in the room gasped. Then the pull-out. The camera shook violently as the G-forces hit. Then the road appeared. The room went silent. On the screen, the trucks were lined up like toys. The crosshairs of the gun sight settled on the first one. Flash. The lead truck exploded. The debris flew past the camera. That's how close he was. Then the next and the next. It was a systematic execution. The film showed the discipline of the firing. Short, controlled bursts, adjusting aim, not spraying, aiming. Then came the ammo truck. The screen turned white. The explosion washed out the film for a second. When the image returned, the Mustang was flying through smoke. The pilots in the room started murmuring. "Look at that low angle," one veteran whispered. "He's under the flak." "Count them," another said. 5, 6, 7. The film ended with the Mustang banking hard over the burning wreckage of the 11th truck. The lights came up. The major sat there for a long moment. He looked at the blank screen. He looked at the pine branch still sitting on the table. He stood up and turned to Jimmy, who was standing by the door, waiting for the verdict. "Lieutenant," the major said. "Sir?" "That was the most reckless, insubordinate, dangerous piece of flying I have ever seen." The major paused. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "And it was the best damn strafing run this squadron has ever executed." The room erupted in cheers. The veterans slapped Jimmy on the back. The skepticism was gone. They realized that the suicide dive wasn't suicide. It was a revolution. "You're not grounded," the major said, his voice dropping so only Jimmy could hear. "But if you ever lie to me about engine trouble again, I'll have you peeling potatoes until the war is over. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Jimmy grinned. "Now," the major said, turning to the map, "show us exactly how you did it, because tomorrow the whole squadron is going down there with you." The suicide dive had just become squadron doctrine, but the Germans weren't going to take this lying down. They had a surprise waiting for the low-level raiders. By September 1944, the 352nd Fighter Group, the blue-nosed bastards of Bodny, had changed. They used to be high-altitude aristocrats, escorting bombers at 25,000 feet where the air was clean and the combat was a duel of knights. Now, thanks to the 22-year-old Lieutenant Jimmy, they were mud movers. The suicide dive had been rebranded. The official reports called it the high-velocity, low-angle attack. But in the barracks, they just called it doing a Jimmy. Jimmy found himself in an awkward position. He was a junior officer, barely old enough to vote, yet he was teaching majors and captains how to fly. "The key is the pull-out," Jimmy explained, chalk dust on his uniform. "If you pull too early, you present your belly to the flak. If you pull too late, you eat dirt. You have to wait until you can count the lug nuts on the wheels." The squadron adopted the tactic with terrifying efficiency. They started hunting in packs. A flight of 4 Mustangs would circle at 10,000 feet, acting as spotters. When they saw a convoy, the lead pair would roll over and dive. It was psychological warfare. The German truck drivers learned to fear the sound of the Merlin engine. They stopped driving during the day. They hid in forests. They covered their vehicles with branches. But Jimmy taught his pilots how to spot the deception. "Look for the straight lines," he told them. "Nature doesn't make straight lines. If you see a hedgerow that looks too perfect, strafe it. If you see a haystack that's square, put a burst into it." The tally grew. In 1 week, the squadron claimed 40 trucks, 3 locomotives, and 2 barges. They were bleeding the Wehrmacht dry, stranding German tanks without fuel and German artillery without shells. But war is a reactive system. For every tactic, there is a counter-tactic, and the Germans were not stupid. They realized that the Americans were getting arrogant. They realized the Mustangs were coming down the same bowling alleys every time. So the Germans set a trap. September 18th. A reconnaissance flight spotted a juicy target near Aachen. A column of 20 soft-skinned trucks parked on a straight road, seemingly abandoned or stalled. "Looks like a free lunch," Jimmy's wingman LT. Red Miller radioed. "Careful, Red," Jimmy warned. "They aren't camouflaged, that's sloppy." But the target was too good to pass up. "Flight, prepare for attack run, I'll take the lead. Red, you follow on my wing. 3 and 4, stay high cover." Jimmy rolled the Mustang inverted. The familiar rush of gravity hit him. The dive was perfect, 400 mph. The wind screamed. He leveled out at 50 feet. The trucks rushed up. He pressed the trigger. The .50 calibers roared. The bullets hit the lead truck. But instead of exploding into fuel and canvas, the sides of the truck fell away. It wasn't a transport truck, it was a flakwagen. Inside the truck bed was a quad 20 flakfueling 38 cannon, and it was manned. "Break, break," Jimmy screamed. The trap was sprung. The entire convoy dropped its disguise. Hay bales fell away to reveal 37 cannons. The abandoned trucks erupted in muzzle flashes, the air around Jimmy filled with golf balls, the terrifying luminous tracers of the German 20. These weren't frightened conscripts shooting rifles. These were veteran flak crews who had waited for the Mustangs to get low and straight. Jimmy felt the impacts. His Mustang shuddered. A 20 shell punched through his right wing, blowing a hole the size of a dinner plate in the aluminum skin. Another shattered his canopy glass, sending plexiglass shards into his face. He yanked the stick back and kicked the rudder, jinking violently. He was flying through a tunnel of fire. "Red, pull up, pull up." He looked in his mirror. Red Miller wasn't so lucky. Red had been focused on the target, fixated on the kill. When the flak opened up, he flew straight into the stream. A 37 shell hit Red's engine. The Merlin block shattered. The prop seized instantly. At 50 feet and 350 mph, you don't have time to glide. You don't have time to bail out. Red's Mustang cartwheeled. The right wing dug into the dirt. The plane disintegrated in a blinding cartwheel of fire and metal, tumbling through the very convoy he had tried to kill. "Red is down," the top-cover pilot shouted. "Oh God, Red is down." Jimmy fought his crippled plane back to altitude. His oil pressure was dropping. His canopy was gone. The wind blasted his face, freezing the blood from the cuts on his cheek. He looked down at the burning wreck of his wingman. The Germans had learned. They knew the Mustangs were coming low, so they brought the guns down to meet them. The suicide dive was living up to its name. The loss of Red Miller changed the atmosphere in the squadron. The game was over. This was a brawl. But the Germans had one more nasty surprise waiting. A weapon so primitive and cruel that it terrified the pilots more than the flak. It was called the cable trap. German engineers began stringing steel cables across narrow valleys and between tall trees along known strafing routes. They were invisible at 400 mph. A pilot would be diving, lined up on a train, and suddenly, snap. The cable would shear a wing off, or decapitate the pilot. On October 2nd, Jimmy was leading a sweep through the Ardennes. The terrain was hilly, forcing the pilots to fly through the valleys to stay under the radar. They spotted a steam locomotive chugging through a gorge. "Train at 12 o'clock low," Jimmy called. "I'm going in." He dove. The train was a black iron beast spewing smoke. As Jimmy descended into the valley, a glint of sunlight flashed ahead of him. A reflection, a wire. His instincts screamed. He hauled back on the stick, breaking his dive early. He zoomed up, clearing the valley floor by 200 feet. His number 3, a new kid named Baker, didn't see the flash. Baker was hungry for his first train kill. He pressed the attack, diving lower. "Baker, pull up, wire, wire," Jimmy screamed. It was too late. The P-51 hit the high-tension cable strung between two pylons. There was no explosion, no fire. The cable simply sliced through the vertical stabilizer of the Mustang like a cheese wire. The tail section separated from the fuselage. The Mustang tumbled end over end, slamming into the side of the gorge. Jimmy circled overhead, watching the smoke rise. He felt a cold knot of rage in his stomach. It wasn't fair. Flak was war, fighters were war, but a hidden wire was a dirty trick. He keyed his mic. "All flight, listen to me. From now on, we don't go into valleys unless we clear the ridges first. And we don't just strafe the trains, we strafe the towers, we strafe the pylons, we burn it all down." The kid from Texas had lost his innocence. He wasn't racing hot rods anymore. He was dismantling a machine. November 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was looming. The Germans were massing for one last desperate offensive. Intelligence reports identified a ghost train. It was a massive armored supply train moving only at night, hiding in tunnels during the day. It was carrying fuel for the Tiger tanks of the 6th Panzer Army. If that train reached the front, thousands of Americans would die. The major called Jimmy into his office. "They spotted it," the major said. "It's parked in a siding near Cologne. It's heavily defended. Flak cars on both ends. Flak towers on the perimeter, and it's hiding under a camouflage net." "We can't bomb it from altitude," Jimmy asked. "Nets are too thick. We need precision. We need someone to go down there, blow the locomotive, and set the tankers on fire." The major looked at Jimmy. "I'm not ordering you to do this, Jim. It's a flak trap. We know it." Jimmy looked at the map. He looked at the winding track. He traced the route with his finger. "If we come in from the north," Jimmy said, "we have to fly over the city. The flak will eat us alive." "I know." But Jimmy pointed to a river, the Rhine. "If we follow the river, stay below the banks, we can pop up right next to the siding. They won't see us until we're lighting their cigarettes." "Flying below the river banks," the major raised an eyebrow. "That's insane. There are bridges, there are cables." "I know," Jimmy said. "That's why they won't expect it." Jimmy stood up. "I'll take the lead. Give me 4 guys who know how to fly dirty. We'll get your train." The mission was set, Operation Iron Horse. It would require the most precise, dangerous flying of the war. Jimmy would have to fly his Mustang like a speedboat, skimming the water of the Rhine, dodging bridges, and popping up into the teeth of an armored train. He walked out to the flight line. His crew chief had painted a new symbol on the nose of his plane. Beneath the rows of swastikas for air kills and trucks for ground kills, he had painted a small locomotive. "Don't jinx me, Chief," Jimmy said. "Not a jinx, Lieutenant," the chief said. "A reservation." Jimmy climbed into the cockpit. He strapped in tighter than usual. He checked his gun sight. He checked his mirror. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's go down to the deck one last time." December 1944, the Rhine River. Jimmy and his flight of 4 Mustangs were not flying. They were boating. They were doing 380 miles per hour, skimming the surface of the water so closely that the prop wash kicked up a mist behind them. This was the only way to approach the rail siding at Cologne undetected. The German radar net couldn't see down into the river valley. The flak towers on the hills couldn't depress their guns low enough to track them. But the river had its own dangers. "Bridge ahead," Jimmy called, his voice tight. "Go under." It was a maneuver that would have gotten them court-martialed in training. But here, pulling up to clear the bridge meant popping up into the radar coverage. Jimmy tightened his grip. The stone arches of the bridge rushed toward him. He aimed for the center span. Zoom! The shadow of the bridge flickered over the cockpit for a fraction of a second. The sound of the engine echoed off the stone with a deafening crack. They were through. "Clear," Red 2 called. "Jesus, that was close." "Stay focused," Jimmy ordered. 2 minutes to target." He checked his map. The rail siding was just around the next bend. The ghost train would be parked there under its nets, waiting for darkness. Jimmy armed his guns. He checked his coolant temperature. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was liquid-cooled. It was the Mustang's Achilles heel. 1 bullet in the radiator, 1 piece of shrapnel in the coolant lines, and the engine would seize in minutes. Flying this low into the teeth of an armored train was inviting that single, fatal bullet. "Pop up in 3, 2, 1, pull." Jimmy hauled back on the stick. The Mustang roared up out of the river valley, climbing from 20 feet to 500 feet in seconds. And there it was. The intelligence was right. The train was massive. A black iron locomotive spewing steam, connected to 20 flatbed cars loaded with Tiger tanks and fuel tankers. But the Germans were awake. As soon as the Mustangs popped up over the riverbank, the flak cars on the train opened fire. The air filled with the terrifying crack thump of 20 shells exploding. Jimmy ignored the flak. He fixated on the locomotive. A steam locomotive is a pressurized bomb. The boiler contains superheated steam at hundreds of pounds per square inch. If you puncture it, the physics take over. Jimmy didn't do a shallow dive. He rolled inverted and pulled into his signature suicide dive, coming down at a 60-degree angle. He waited 1,000 yards, 800 yards. The face of the train engineer was visible in the window, looking up in horror. Jimmy squeezed the trigger. The 6.50 calibers hammered the iron skin of the boiler. Sparks flew as the armor-piercing rounds chewed through the steel. Then the pressure vessel failed. It didn't just explode, it erupted. A massive geyser of scalding white steam blasted outward, shredding the metal skin of the train like paper. The shockwave derailed the locomotive. The wheels lifted off the track. The entire front of the train twisted violently to the right, dragging the fuel tankers behind it. "Pull up, pull up." Jimmy yanked the stick back. He flew directly through the cloud of steam. His windshield fogged over instantly. For 2 seconds, he was flying blind at 400 mph. He burst out the other side, his plane dripping with condensation. Behind him, the rest of the flight dropped their bombs. Boom, boom. The fuel tankers ignited. The Tiger tanks on the flatbeds were engulfed in a sea of burning gasoline. The ammunition car cooked off, sending secondary explosions ripping through the rail yard. "Target destroyed," Red 3 yelled. "Look at that burn." But the German gunners were still firing. As Jimmy banked away, a flak shell clipped his tail. The Mustang shuddered. The rudder pedals went mushy. "I'm hit," Jimmy said calmly, losing rudder control. He checked his gauges. Oil pressure steady, coolant temp steady. He had been lucky. The shell had hit the control cables, not the engine. "Form up on me," Jimmy ordered. "We're going home on the deck. Nobody climbs until we cross the lines." They dropped back down to the river, leaving a pillar of black smoke behind them that marked the end of the 6th Panzer Army's fuel supply. The war in Europe ended 5 months later. The 352nd Fighter Group had racked up over 800 air victories, but their ground tally was even more staggering. Thousands of trucks, hundreds of locomotives, and countless barges destroyed. They had strangled the Wehrmacht. But the cost was high. The mud movers suffered the highest casualty rates of any fighter units. Low-level flak didn't take prisoners. On VE Day, while the mechanics drank champagne and the other pilots danced, Jimmy sat alone with his airplane. He ran his hand over the nose art. The paint was chipped from the gravel of the airstrips. The leading edges of the wings were dented from hitting debris. He was 23 years old. He had survived over 80 missions. He had done a Jimmy more times than he could count. He thought about Red Miller. He thought about the kid named Baker who hit the wire. He realized that the suicide dive wasn't about bravery. It was about math. It was about calculating the odds and betting your life that you were faster than the gunner on the ground. He had won the bet, but he had left a lot of chips on the table. He took a piece of chalk and wrote a final entry on the fuselage, right next to the kill markings. "Paid in full." He climbed down, walked to the barracks, and packed his bag. He was done with speed. He was done with the deck. James Jimmy, last name, returned to Texas. He became an engineer working in the oil fields. He never raced cars again. He drove the speed limit. But the tactics he pioneered didn't disappear. The suicide dive and the high-speed strafing run became the foundation of close air support, CAS. When the Air Force designed the A-10 Warthog in the 1970s, they built it around the lessons learned by the Mustang pilots of 1944. They armored the cockpit with a titanium bathtub because they knew the pilots would be on the deck. They built the engines high and apart to survive the flak that killed Red Miller. Every time a modern attack pilot dives on a convoy, checking their dive angle, watching the slant range, managing their energy, They are using the physics that a 22-year-old kid figured out because he disobeyed an order to bomb from 5,000 feet. At Frontline Memoirs, we believe that history is written by the innovators, the ones who looked at the manual, threw it out the window, and found a better way to win. Jimmy proved that sometimes the safest place to be is right in the enemy's face. If you enjoyed this story of the suicide dive and the destruction of the ghost train, please hit the like button. It helps us keep these stories alive. And we have a question for you. What is the craziest low-level flying story you've ever heard? The dam busters, the flight under the Eiffel Tower? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on notifications. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit that like button, subscribe for more forgotten heroes, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served in it.